Report from Santa Fe is made possible in part by grants from the members of the National Education Association of New Mexico, an organization of professionals who believe that investing in public education is an investment in our state's economic future, and by a grant from the Healy Foundation, Taos, New Mexico.
Hello, I'm Lorene Mills, and welcome to Report from Santa Fe. Today, the topic of the hour is ethics, and I have brought two outstanding senators, one senator, one former senator. Ladies first, former Senator Dede Feldman, thank you for joining us.
Oh, thank you for inviting me.
Well, this is a hot topic, and our other guest, thank you for joining us, Senator Peter Wirth, Democrat from Santa Fe.
Happy to be here.
We are, again, I called you here because I'm so grateful for all the work you've done on ethics and many other important issues. We're just going to focus on the ethics today. Dede, you served 16 years as a senator from Bernalillo County, the Albuquerque North Valley, from 97 to 2012.
Yeah.
And you chaired the Public Affairs Committee. You did a lot of work on health care, on ethics, on lots of things. And you chose to not run again. And look what you did with your time. You wrote an intriguing book called Inside the New Mexico Senate, and the subtitle is?
Boots, Suits, and Citizens.
It's true.
Yeah.
It's true. We'll tell us a little more about this. And Peter, you've been in the Senate for 7 years, but you were in the House for 4 years. You took Max Call's seat. Your family, tell us a little about your family, because you have a blue ribbon pedigree for New Mexico.
Well, it's interesting. My grandfather on my mom's side, John Meem, came to Santa Fe in 1920 with tuberculosis and was in the sanitarium just up the street. And then my dad was actually born in Dawson, New Mexico, and we've got a whole connection to what's now Ghost Town up by Raton. And so also grandfather on dad's side was up at the Los Alamos Ranch School before the war. So a very neat kind of history on both sides of the family.
Well, we're going to talk and also you've both gotten so many awards, I won't even go, but you got the Best in Government Award from Common Cause, Green Champion, and I think well, we can't spend all the time, but you've been much appreciated for your work.
Yeah, it's humbling. It's humbling I think for both of us.
Yes, but the people are very grateful because, we've been aching for progress in this area. Let's just jump right in. This is a time, again, of an ethical crisis for New Mexico. And it makes us look so bad nationally and internationally. Peter, tell us a story about the call you got from your daughter.
Well, our daughter Elena is 18, a freshman at George Washington in D.C., and of course growing up in a political family, lots of politics at the dinner table. Well, Elena's off in D.C. and sends a text that she picked up the Washington Post, which we're always very proud to have the kids reading the paper.
Yeah.
Yes.
And there's Dad being quoted in an article about New Mexico, and once again, kind of where we are, why it's so difficult to make change, and what we'll talk about today.
Yeah. And I think just this morning, coming across my email, was a notice that there was an AP story about New Mexico in the Miami Herald and in the Kansas City Star. So, the whole country is taking note of what's going on here, unfortunately.
And not only print, but CNN and Fox and MSNBC, here we are again. So let's back up a little bit as we approach this. And if each of us could tell us your history in ethics. The whole point, one of the things I really want to push in this is I think it's time that we have an ethics commission. And I think it would also be a really good idea if we had an election commission and keep the fox out of the hen house, so to speak, have no partisan elements in redistricting and in counting votes. But so that's the future. Please, I'm always going to go to Dede first, ladies
absolutely.
first.
She led the way.
You led the way.
Well, there's a long history of this in New Mexico. And when I came to the Senate in 1997, that was the first time I introduced a campaign finance bill. And it was a bill to limit campaign contributions, and it actually passed the Senate, and it was killed immediately in the House. I think that's why the senators passed it. They knew it would be killed in the House. And I vow to introduce a piece of reform legislation every year. The pace of reform legislation, or at least the numbers of bills that were introduced, accelerated after 2005, when Robert V. Hill was almost impeached by the House. He resigned short of that. But after that, there was a task force that was set up by Governor Richardson called the Governor's Task Force on Ethics and Campaign Finance Reform. And it met for 2 interims and introduced a slew of bills that first year, 2007. One of, I think it was about 10 passed, and that was a gift, a regulation of gifts given to legislators. But an ethics commission was part of that package, and since then there have been about 50, probably more than 50 bills now introduced about an ethics commission. You can Google them all on the state website and take a look at them. None of them have passed. There have been many reasons given for why. Many of them have passed the House. Many of them have passed the House, maybe when you were in the House, I'm not sure. But they have all faltered in the Senate. And that's, I think that's where the big obstacle is and continues to be.
Now, when you first came in, a freshman lawmaker in the House, you were on the impeachment committee for Robert V. Hill, our state treasurer. Tell us about what that was like.
Well, firstly, let me just say that it's interesting. You're here long enough that you do kind of see things change and all this effort that's happened. When I first came in 2004, we had no campaign limits at all. One of 5 states, no gift limits.
Yeah.
All our committees were not webcast. The floor sessions were not webcast. We only filed campaign reports once a year when we weren't running, so very limited access to information. Conference committees closed. So I know we're talking about kind of the crisis of where we are, but I have to say, as I sat and thought about coming on, we've also actually moved this state in a way that I think is really, really important, and certainly the constituents and citizens appreciate that. But here we are again in impeachment, and you're correct. When 2005, my first year, Speaker Lujan appointed me to an impeachment panel, and it was eyes wide open as a lawyer to basically be writing the roadmap. We hadn't done this before, and trying to figure out the standard and how to proceed, and all the challenges that come when you have a legislative body in a quasi-judicial function. And that's a very hard thing for legislative bodies to deal with. We've seen a lot of that locally.
Well, talk about the time when Speaker Lujan entered one of these committees, the impeachment committee, again in its quasi-judicial function. What happened?
Well, we were set up. First of all, there was no partisanship. It was 5 Democrats, 5 Republicans, and we were in a closed session with our attorneys. And Speaker Lujan came into the room, as he liked to do, and I will never forget him being told by the committee chairs that he couldn't be there, which probably was a first in this building for him not to be able to be there. So it's a very different process for us, and it's hard. There's just no way around it. It's a hard thing to do.
Well, we are in this crisis situation now. Our Secretary of State has had some charges, 65 counts, I think, 64, 65, by the Attorney General. We have to make something very clear that since you're a sitting lawmaker, and one of the steps, if she chooses not to resign, will be the formation of impeachment proceedings, and you as a lawmaker will be involved in that, and so we know that you cannot address this particular issue. And so, fortunately, Dede, you can, but what I'm concerned about is we have the Secretary of State issue. We've got Demetria Padilla releasing the names, and even not on the state level, but in the Albuquerque Public Schools and the superintendent and the deputy superintendent. How is the public ever going to? How are we going to win the public's trust back?
Well, one thing I want to say, following on Senator Wirth, and in response to that question, is that thank goodness for transparency. Thank goodness for the transparency measures that we have introduced in the past, I'd say since 2003. And it was in 2003 that we started to put campaign contributions on the web so that people could, if they were interested, look at them, try to reconcile the contributions and the expenditures. Now, it's very difficult because of the nature of that website to do that easily. But at least now we do have open meetings, we do have webcast floor sessions, committee meetings, with the exception, I think, of the impeachment committee. You know, that's really helped in the case of Secretary of State Duran. I mean, without those documents on the web, it would have been very difficult for anybody to verify some of the charges that the Attorney General is making. So, you know, I think that's something that we have to be thankful for, but we have to keep pressing to make sure that that website at the Secretary of State's office is searchable, has a way that you can compare what the lobbyists are giving with what the candidates are spending. So, you know, that the credibility of the Secretary of State's office is now at an all-time low as a result of these allegations. And, you know, how they can do their job is it's going to be much more difficult, which is why I think a lot of people have suggested taking that office out. You know, we make these structural changes in Santa Fe all the time. We recently gave the Secretary of State a bunch of new duties when it came to, I think, kind of ministerial functions about corporations and so on.
So those functions were taken from the PRC, which is definitely an overloaded agency, and given to the Secretary of State. And we can easily take some of the other burdens off that seem inappropriate in a partisan office.
Well, that's the question. There is now a person who is elected, Democrat or Republican, person that is elected who is in charge of A, counting the votes in the state, and B, making sure everybody plays by the rules. And there's a great opportunity for partisan influence in both of those areas. So, you know, there have been suggestions many times. I introduced a bill a couple of times, I think others may have as well, for an elections commission to appoint a nonpartisan professional director of elections who would oversee campaign finance reports and elections, and just transfer that budget from the Secretary of State's office to this new organization. Of course, it's been opposed both times. I introduced it anyway by the Secretary of State. And, you know, certain things are set up in the Constitution, too. I mean, this state is fairly unique in having what they call a plural executive, right, where these other offices are elected separately. So that kind of presents some difficulties.
You know, I would note, Lorene, that the latest version of the Ethics Commission that Brian Egoff has carried in the House has pulled the Elections Commission into it. So we've now got this kind of monster agency, which is a little bit concerning, just because trying to set something new up like this, the bigger it gets, the more complex it is, the harder it is for us to pass, the more questions that can be raised. But I was actually, it's a 100-plus page bill, and it's got the elections built into the Ethics Commission. So again, another kind of incorporation of this idea that I think, Senator Feldman was the only one that had the elections bill over the years, but now it's kind of been morphed together. And I'll just say this, I think we have seen a number of elections commissions bills pass the House, sometimes unanimously, and they do get bogged down in the Senate. When I chaired the Courts Corrections Committee back in 2010 or 2011, we actually worked on an interim bill that Senator Lopez, I believe, and then Representative O'Neill carried. That made it through the Senate committees and was on the floor but never got heard on the floor. Of course, the big challenge is money. And I think it's important not to forget that we're coming out of a recessionary period where realistically the money wasn't there to staff the new agency. Maybe you pull money out of the Secretary of State, that's an option. But we have to make sure that this thing is funded properly. You're not just creating a shell that then creates this whole other set of problems because it doesn't have the tools to do the job in a fair and balanced way, which it has to do.
Well, we're speaking today with two of the champions of transparency and ethics, Senator Peter Wirth, Democrat from Santa Fe, and former Senator Dede Feldman, Democrat from Bernalillo County. One of the reasons I'm so attached to the idea of, or interested in the idea of an election commission is it for redistricting. Finally, I mean, the whole thing about gerrymandering in these insane districts that make no sense at all, California finally went to a citizen redistricting commission where people would just say, well, there's a river here, it's a logical boundary. They don't just snake along to get just all the members of one party so it's a safe seat. Of course, we have a long history of gerrymandering, but at least with the redistricting, if that could be a little cleaner.
We have a long history of having our redistricting decisions decided in the courts in New Mexico. Mm-hmm. That's what we have a long history of. It's very difficult to take it out of the hands of the legislators, and I think. Which I totally support. But I also think you're a little naive if you think if it's in the hands of a commission, you remove politics completely too. So you have to, as the senator said, it's important how it's structured. It has to be fair. It has to be balanced. But there's one question that I just keep coming back to in my mind about all of this, especially the Ethics Commission and the current problem in the Secretary of State's office, which basically is that the honor system is no longer working. And that question is, how much is it worth? I mean, we know that it takes a lot to fund an ethics commission, to reorganize this process, but how much is public trust worth financially? I don't know whether there's ever been any studies done on that. Maybe that doesn't matter, but it's got to be really worth something in terms of, engaging people in voting, engaging people in running for office and being interested in issues, tuning into the webcast. That, I think that's really worth something. And every year there's a poll, there's a poll that says over 80% of New Mexicans think that their elected officials are crooked, or at least they're taking money from special interests. And every year it's just, everybody goes, oh, how awful. And then nothing happens. So I just don't know what to say about that.
There's an economic development aspect of that, too. What we're talking about, the national and international press we get when we have yet another corruption scandal. People, that's what comes to their mind when they think, should we put our business there? No, they're too corrupt. And so there's so many elements on what it's worth. So when you say, how are we going to fund these commissions if we have them? Can we afford to, but I don't think we can afford not to. We have to, like you say, rebuild our public trust.
No, I agree, Lorraine. And there's another piece of the Ethics Commission that often the public doesn't realize, but it's something that certainly as a lawyer, we have a body that you can go to if you find yourself in an ethical predicament. and you can go and work through the issue before you get yourself in the goop.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
so the other thing that an ethics commission would do, I think, is really help us as citizen legislators. I mean, the conflicts are there.
Yes.
There is no way around it. I
Yes.
have a full-time law practice.
Yes.
You know, I serve on different functions in the community, and these things come up, and you just have to kind of work your way through those things. And I just think that having that body to continually educate, to work with elected officials is a really positive thing. And that also helps because obviously then the number of these things go down, I think, as folks have the information to make good decisions.
Well, I think this is very important in a citizens' legislature, and that's the system we have now. And I think the phrase that was used in that ethics task force by Governor Carruthers, former Governor Carruthers, was to draw bright lines in a gray area. And this is a gray area for most. And, you know, although the New Mexico polled public thinks that perhaps their elected officials are bought, the reality is that they are not bought, and that they are actually trying to do their job in a very gray area. They're good people that I believe are caught in a flawed system, and we can fix it.
Well, it's so important. I'm so grateful to you both for mentioning the educational aspect of this, because I remember back when Michael Montoya, the former treasurer who was sent to jail, actually said in this room on this program, but kickbacks is how we've always done business in New Mexico. And I thought he might actually really believe that. Maybe at some point nobody ever taught him right from wrong. On the other hand, it could just be, you know, a defense. But we have to be sure if we've taken civics out of the schools and there's no the parent families are falling apart. Nobody's teaching kids right from wrong. We need to be sure that everybody's on the same page with what's right and what's wrong.
That's right. And it's not just a matter of legislators and elected officials. It's also a question of state employees, public employees who are handling procurement issues, or are public information officers abiding by the Open Meetings Act. And you
I
know,
think that was
everyone.
one of Senator Feldman's long list of accomplishments. I seem to remember. You could be actually bidding on a contract that was being let, and that contractor could be making, or their family could be making political contributions during the process. That's the kind of thing that we've managed to shut that loophole. And so I do think, again, I just want to stress too, because I think something that Senator Feldman, and it's been such an honor for me to get to have worked with her and to watch what she was able to do and to try to kind of continue this push and to see this movement when it really was kind of Don Quixote out there running these bills and getting 1 or 2 votes in committee. I mean, I've been there. I know what that's like, and I think we've made progress, and we have a lot of very good people who serve in this chamber, and I respect them tremendously. And it's figuring out, though, how to, you know, get over the bad apples that send us off the cliff when it comes to this. And so, again, it's tough. It's a big lift because change is not easy in this building.
No.
And any time there's change that has the potential to impact individual members, there's huge fear about political accusations being made, and someone just lobs something up against the wall, and all of a sudden it's in public, and then it just damages that person's reputation, and by the time they finally defend themselves, it's been out there. And so these are the kind of challenges when you get into the weeds on the Ethics Commission. And but we're in the, what is it, 8 states now, 9 states? We're in the vast majority have done this, and we need to do it as well.
Yeah. And I want to thank you for your efforts, too, to keep pushing for this, because it will happen. It will happen. I think that in New Mexico we're not always in the lead, and it will happen New Mexico style. But, you know, everybody is afraid of some sort of personal damage and partisan, unfair partisan advantage being taken. But now everyone in the system, Republicans, Democrats, everyone in the system is tarred by every time there is a case of alleged corruption at a high level. So I think that, that maybe that's a fear that people can sort of shuck off, but I think that should be considered as well.
And one other interesting thing, and I've said this publicly as well, I find it fascinating. This is one of those areas where you have bipartisan support and you've got bipartisan opposition.
Yeah.
Representative Cook and I were sponsors of an ethics constitutional amendment, ethics commission constitutional amendment this last session, and it didn't go anywhere. But we just got to keep pushing.
And you and Senator Rue, the Sunshine Portal, you two have worked bipartisanly to move for more transparency.
Senator Rue has done a lot, and should really be commended. And in states, it's different, because in states where they have an initiative process, or where they have a process where this can be put locally in New Mexico, where this can be put on the ballots. In Albuquerque, for example, it was in 2005, right after the V. Hill scandal hit, that they immediately passed by a very wide margin, I think 70%, public financing for city elections. So the fact that we don't have an initiative makes it even more difficult.
Well, I hope that we do. We're going to have to leave it there. One thing I want to recommend, this is Senator Feldman's book, Inside the New Mexico Senate. It's a history, it's a call to arms, it's a guide for reformers. So if there are people who want to make some of these differences, you can see some of the efforts that have been made. It's a very educational thing. Thank you, Senator, for writing this, for being here. Senator Wirth, thank you so much. I sit in the Senate gallery and I watch you fighting the good fight. I'm very grateful to both of you for your efforts, and maybe one day we'll be in this room celebrating the establishment of an ethics commission that lasts. Thank you so much. And I'm Lorene Mills. I'd like to thank you, our audience, for being with us today on Report from Santa Fe. We'll see you next week.
Past archival programs of Report from Santa Fe are available at the website reportfromsantafe.com. If you have questions or comments, please email info@reportfromsantafe.com. Report from Santa Fe is made possible in part by grants from the members of the National Education Association of New Mexico, an organization of professionals who believe that investing in public education is an investment in our state's economic future, and by a grant from the Healy Foundation, Taos, New Mexico.